before we begin. Now then, let's finish up the post-mortem stream on Oscar Wilde's complete works, which I have now read in its entirety on YouTube. I meant to do all this last night, but for some reason I was rushing myself, and I ended up skipping like a big section of the book. So I really want to come here and do this right and finish it up. Now there is a letter that is printed in this book that I wanted to also read, but I don't see it. So we're going to start at the beginning of the book, okay? The Picture of Dorian Gray. This was, I think, the last thing I read before the plays, because it was like essays, poems, De Profundis, short stories, Dorian Gray, and then the plays last, because those were the most complicated. So, you know, I had read a bunch of his writing already by the time I tackled Dorian Gray, but even so, I had this, like, I still felt a little bit nervous about it, because it's such an epic book, you know. And furthermore, I'm like doing these English accents, and like, what if an English person sees this and is offended? And then you know, I was doing it on the live, and in this one I didn't have the camera on, so it was the audio, and it's like, it's a scary book, right? And I had the live on, and I had the chat, like the chat was allowed because I didn't know how to change that. And so I was getting some comments like, you know, this is creepy. And I'm thinking, like, yeah, it's Dorian Gray. It's supposed to be creepy. That means I'm doing my job, right? So, you know, it's not I'm into creepy stuff. I'm just into Oscar Wilde, and some of the things he wrote were creepy. So anyway, what do we have after a picture of Dorian Gray? Okay, before that was the short stories. Lord Arthur Saville's Crime. Now this is a story where a guy who was about to be married meets a palm reader at a party, and the palm reader looks at his hand and gets all scared, and he tracks him down, and he forces the palm reader to tell him what he saw in his palm. And the palm reader reluctantly tells him that he saw, you know, that he was going to commit a murder. And so the guy's freaking out. He's like, well, I'm about to marry this wonderful woman. Like, I don't want to mess up our life together by committing this murder. Like, that's not fair to her. So in his logic, he was like, well, if I commit the murder before we get married, then everything will be okay. And so Lord Arthur Saville's Crime is about, it's called A Study of Duty. So he felt that it was like his duty to commit this crime. And actually, I now see a parallel between this and Salome, because in Salome, the prophet Jochanan, John the Baptist, has prophesied that the day he dies, something terrible will happen to someone. And Herod is like all scared about these. Like, he's like, well, Jochanan said that the day he dies, something terrible is going to happen to someone. It can only be me. But what happens instead is that he orders Salome killed after he sees her kiss his dead head that she requested on a silver platter as a reward for dancing for Herod. And so I sort of saw, like, well, he knew that something bad had to happen to someone. He didn't want it to happen to him, so then he made it happen to Salome. So I sort of draw a parallel there. Okay, so what is next? After Lord Saville's Crime, Arthur Saville. Then we have The Canterville Ghost. This I thought was a very funny story, and shortly after I read it, I saw on streaming that there was a movie made of The Canterville Ghost, and I'm like, is this the same thing? I can't believe this. And I saw Patrick Stewart was in it, and I was like, yeah, it's probably the same thing. So I put it on, I'm watching it, and it's like Neve Campbell, you know, in the 90s doing all her Neve Campbell shtick, and it's like, it's shaping up to be this like incredibly cheesy, you know, semi-family haunted house movie. I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. You know, the people who played the parents, I was just like, I was like, who are these people? I wasn't impressed with the parents. I'm like, well, what is going on with this movie? Of course, now Patrick Stewart, he kills it. He nails it because he's amazing. Patrick Stewart is amazing. And then, but the movie was quite different from the story, because the story I found was much more comedic, whereas the movie was more serious. And at the same time, the movie added a lot of stuff that wasn't in the story. And the direction that it went was like, so the Canterville ghost was the ghost of this man who who apparently like killed his wife, and it turned out that he was like imprisoned in this room in the back of the palace in the mansion, and he was like chained there, and they find his remains. I don't know, but what they did with the movie, which I thought turned out to be really clever, was that they sort of made it like an allegory for Oscar Wilde's life, because instead of this kind of old ghost having like killed his wife in cold blood and is just like, oh, she deserved it or whatever, they made it like he had sort of driven her away in a way that sort of like, then she died and he felt responsible for it, so he blamed himself for her death. And furthermore, there was a scene where the young girl had to like lead him up to the gates of heaven to be accepted, to like meet the angels and be accepted into heaven or something. It's been a few months since I saw this, so I don't really remember it very well. But now, of course, to me, it's like, okay, angels in heaven with the Christian heaven, like, been there, done it. It's a little bit corny, but actually, I mean, that's something that Oscar would have appreciated. And because Oscar himself was in exile towards the end of his life, he was living in poverty and destitution, blaming himself for shitting his wife. And I mean, if you read in De Profundis, he just talks about how terrible he feels for sort of like not being there for his children. Like, he was just like, how could I have, it's only now that I see like how valuable, how important my children were to me. And he sort of regrets the things that he did that led to him being imprisoned. And so I thought that it was really nice what they did with the movie. And there was some basis for the ghost sort of getting connected with the daughter, because there was like one line where he sort of ponders the daughter, so there was like a justification. So I thought that was a nice movie. But yeah, the story is actually, it's quite short. No, it's not. Yes, it is. I don't know, but it was more funny. But the movie was more like serious and offering spiritual redemption to the memory of Oscar Wilde himself. Okay, so The Young King, this one was like, oh, this was also, they talk about how this sort of predicts Oscar's trajectory, where like he grows up and everything is like wonderful, and but then he later has to face all these trials to make him like appreciate things, and those trials end up really hurting his health to the point that he doesn't live very long, even after having attained all that wisdom, which is what happened to Oscar too, because everything was great for him. He made a lecturing career at a young age, he was wealthy, he had all these wonderful possessions, but then everything happened with Lord Alfred Douglas Bosie and his father and the libel trial, and Oscar getting sent to prison. His family had to flee in shame to another country and change their name, and they never changed it back. And meanwhile, Oscar's in prison. He ends up, exiled, living in France, dying penniless and stuff like that. So that was interesting. What do we have after The Young King? The Birthday of the Infanta. Yeah, this was a pretty depressing story about this princess who, she just wants to be entertained, and they bring this like little like dwarf dude to come entertain her, and she's like, oh yeah, this is really funny, and she's just laughing at him, and he thinks that she's laughing with him, and then he sees a mirror, and he didn't like realize that he was different or whatever, and so he like somehow dies of grief having finally seen what he looks like and how other people see him, which is really sad. I mean, if you think about the plight of, entertainers, if you think about the plight of court fools, I mean, court jesters in the medieval era, like a lot of times these were people who they were different. They may have had physical disabilities, they may have had intellectual disabilities, they may have had mental illnesses, and they had these places in these courts where they would be like the only one who was allowed to say screwed up stuff because they were the fool. They weren't they weren't like, smart people who knew how to do comedy. They were like people with disabilities who were just themselves and who were allowed to be themselves within the context of this royal court. And so what everybody else was thinking and wasn't allowed to say to the king or the queen, the court fool could say it and, not have their head cut off, usually. And so yeah, the birthday of the Infanta, this poor fool dies of grief, and then the princess sees that he dies of grief, and she's like, well, in the future, anyone who wants to play with me, shouldn't have a heart to be broken, essentially. The Fisherman and His Soul. Now this was interesting because there was this idea of like mermaids not having a soul. Now, in recent weeks, I've been watching a lot of this channel called Esoterica with Dr. Justin Sledge, which is great. I recommend it. It's so interesting. And there was something that came up where mermaids didn't have a soul. I don't know where it came from, but apparently Oscar was reading the same thing. No surprise. And so mermaids don't have a soul. And so the guy, he meets this mermaid. He wants to be with her, but she's like, well, you have a soul. I can't be with you if you have a soul. You gotta get rid of your soul if you want to be with me. So he goes and like visits the sea witch or the witch or whatever, and she's like, okay, yeah, I can separate you from your soul. You have to dance with me. And so he goes through the ritual. He dances with her. He sends his soul on his way. His soul goes out into the world and has all these different adventures. Now the soul wants to be with him. He wants to be reunited, but the man, without his soul, he just wants to be with this mermaid. So, but like every year the soul would come back and try to rejoin with the man and tell him about all of his adventures and try to get him to go with him in journey. And and finally at one point the soul was like, oh, I saw this dancer who dances so well with her feet, and this entices the man because his mermaid lover, woman, girlfriend doesn't have feet to dance with. So he follows the soul to all this way to go try to see this dancer, and the soul really just wants to be reunited with the man. And I'm trying to remember exactly how it ends. What happens is like, because the soul had been going around without the man, the soul didn't have a heart. And so while the soul is telling the man about all of his adventures, it turns out that the soul has done a lot of really bad things. And then the man is like, well, why would you do all this stuff? And he's like, well, you sent me out into the world without a heart. What do you expect, So that was interesting. Let's see, what is next after the Fisherman and His Soul? We had the Star Child. The Star Child, it's like this baby is dropped off with these poor people. They take it into their home. They raise it as their own. The Star Child is like, oh, he wasn't just a normal baby. He was like, he came out of a rainbow or out of a star or some celestial thing. But then as they grow up, the Star Child is like, beautiful, and the other ones are plain, and then he sort of like lords over them. And then one day, like, his mother comes back to collect him, but she looks like a beggar woman, and so he was like, oh, I don't want you. And so she then like takes away his beauty, and so then he has to go around like a nasty beggar trying to find his mother to get her to take him back. And then he has to go through all these trials. Like, he meets this evil sorcerer who is like, he's beating him all the time and telling him to go find treasures, and if he doesn't bring them back, he'll beat him. But then every time he finds the treasure, someone asks him for it, and their plight seems like worse than his, and he gives it to them, even though he's going to be beaten by the sorcerer. So fortunately, he redeems himself that way, and eventually his parents take him back. Or maybe this is the one where they take him back and he becomes king, but then his health is compromised from being beaten by the sorcerer. I don't know. Okay, the Happy Prince. What was the Happy Prince? Oh yeah, this one's really sad. The Happy Prince is like, he's the statue of this prince, and he's so beautiful because he's made of gold and jewels and stuff. But he's not happy because he's like put up in the town to look at on the town, and all around the town, all he sees is like all these terrible things happening, just people destitute and children hungry and all this depressing stuff. And so a bird, like a swallow, lands on him and is like talking to him, and the Happy Prince is like, okay, well, take the jewel, take the sapphire of my eye and give it to this poor person who needs it. And he does this one by one. And the swallow, by the way, is trying to fly like south for the winter so that he won't die of the freezing cold. But, night after night he does these errands for the prince. He takes the jewels out of his eyes. He takes all the jewels off of the prince. He takes all the gold leaf and he gives it to these poor people as the prince asks him to. And finally, the Happy Prince statue is now like, he's no longer beautiful. He's just like a piece of tin. And he's like, okay, well now, thank you, Swallow. Now you can go fly south. And the Swallow's like, yeah, it's too late for me. I'm going to freeze to death tonight. So, good night, sweet prince, or whatever. And so the statue gets scrapped, and the dead bird is scrapped with him, and so they're scrapped together. Now then, what was next after the Happy Prince? The Nightingale and the Rose. So this is one where another one of like sacrifice, because this nightingale hears this young man trying to pursue this young lady, and she's like, well, you have to bring me a red rose if you want to dance with me at this ball or whatever. And there's no red roses left, and so he was like, well, I guess I'll never get to dance with her. But the nightingale is like determined to make this happen for this guy, because the nightingale like wants this love to happen, And so the nightingale makes a deal with the tree where it will sing and sing and sing for the tree in order to make the rose red. But what the tree does is it makes it red with the nightingale's blood. So the nightingale sacrifices itself and sings all night as this thorn pierces this heart and turns this rose red. And in the morning, the dude is like, ooh, look, a red rose. Hey, now I can get my love, He takes it to the girl, and she's like, oh, that won't match my dress, and anyway, I'm going with this other guy anyway. So it's like the nightingale sacrificed herself for nothing. The girl didn't care. And the boy, the youth who apparently loved her so much, was like, oh, well, I guess I'll just go study my books and just be a philosopher or something. So just kind of like, I don't know, fatalistic, nihilistic, I don't know what that is. The Selfish Giant. This is one that gets very Christian. But you know what? That's how Oscar rolled sometimes. Sometimes he was very Christian, and sometimes he was very pagan, and sometimes who even cares? He was whatever he wanted to be at that moment, because it was all about style and not sincerity. It's all about art for art's sake. You don't have to believe something in order to write it down and make it sound good. And that was like Oscar in a nutshell, I guess. So, yeah, The Selfish Giant. The Devoted Friend. This is another kind of depressing tale of sacrifice. When you read Oscar's De Profundis, he talks so much about, all the things that Bosie did to him and how he led him into this, into the situation, for him to be thrown in jail, to have all of his possessions auctioned off, to lose all of his stuff, to go to jail, which is screwing up his health and all these other things. And it's just like, Bosie, you did this, and just recounts like every bad thing Bosie ever did. But then he's like, but actually, really, I did this to myself. He's like, I can't blame you, I did this to myself. And I thought to myself, like, this is masochistic, you know? I mean, to sort of like let these things happen to you, to go after someone who you know is like hurting you, but just to keep like pursuing that, there's like a sort of masochistic streak. And I thought to myself, well, wouldn't it be interesting to like go back through Oscar Wilde's writing and find all these masochistic strains, and here's another one right here, I guess. The devoted friend, because so we have this like this dude, there's like a miller, and then the little Hans. Okay, so little Hans has this nice little garden, and the miller has a much more comfortable like place to live. He's got, I don't know, I guess he's has more stability in terms of like having food throughout the year and being able to afford his stuff, whereas little Hans, I guess he has a nice garden, but it's seasonal, and so in the winter he gets like really, it's not good for him in the winter. But basically, the miller like takes advantage of Hans. Hans, um, he just does whatever the miller asks him because he like wants him as a friend. Or the miller would say such beautiful things to him about friendship, and so he would believe whatever the miller says about friendship. And so whenever the miller would be like, oh, well, you're my friend, so you can do this for me, he would always do it for him, but he wasn't getting anything back. And it ended up leading to Hans's death, and it's very sad. So yeah. And like the other thing about Oscar and Bosie is he writes that like, so some people will say, well, I was older than you, so I had an influence over you, but that's really not true, and that's not true because I could never have any influence over you. It was all you, dictating everything or whatever. And it's just that masochistic strain. Hello, Reynaldo. What it is? Did you watch any of the Oscar Wilde videos? What did you think? So, the remarkable rocket. Now, so in this project of Oscar Wilde, I was getting into doing the voices more, but I wasn't reading things in advance. I was just sort of, especially with the stories, I was just making up voices like on the spot and just assigning voices on the spot. And in the remarkable rocket, it says that the rocket speaks very slowly. And so I did that, but I ended up like hey, what's up? I ended up sort of like regretting it because have you watched my movie yet? Salome's Last Prance? I just posted it yesterday. Totally watch that. Oh my gosh. It's audio visual. It's hot. I hope. It's a vehicle for my music. Anyway, so I decided to do this like slow voice for the Remarkable Rocket, not realizing that he was going to have all these long monologues. And I was like, oh, I can either stick with this and ride this out, or I can backtrack. But I stuck with it, and it was kind of torturous because just saying all these long monologues in this incredibly slow, annoying voice was like, oh my gosh. But I think it worked out in the end. I'm glad I stuck with it, The Portrait of Mr. W.H. So yeah, as I discussed last night. Okay, let me know what you think about the movie. Let me know, because I want to know what you think. I need feedback in my life. So The Portrait of Mr. W.H. is this theory about Shakespeare and Mr. W.H. It was like this theory that Oscar was obsessed with in real life. He was obsessed with it, and he wrote this story about someone who was obsessed with this theory. This theory that that Shakespeare had a certain actor in his company that he was in love with, and that he devoted all these sonnets to, and this theory that that there was this woman who was trying to take the actor sort of away from him, and so Shakespeare himself decided to go try to seduce this woman so that she would be his lover and not take the young actor away. And so that's where you see like my lover's eyes are nothing like the sun. My lover, she has black wires in her hair, and so he's writing all these sonnets about this like dark woman who he doesn't seem to like very much, but is like making love to. So that's the theory that is discussed in Mr. WH, and it's a theory that Oscar himself was obsessed with. And I love seeing that because, myself, I've gone very deep into like Vincent van Gogh, Frida Kahlo, Oscar Wilde, and to know that the people before me were going deep into their predecessors too, it makes you feel connected. Um, we all get these interests. We want to delve deeper and deeper and find out what the artists before us were thinking, what they were reading, who they were attracted to. Okay, so that was the stories. Then I'll talk about the plays. I talked about the importance of being earnest last night. I love that. That's hilarious. After that, we had Lady Windermere's Fan. I love this play. I love the movie. I love the movie. Thank you, Ronaldo. I love the movie with Scarlett Johansson and Helen Hunt. I think it's just tremendous. And the movie really added a lot because the play itself takes place in the span of like 24 hours. Whereas the movie, spans like, I don't know, at least maybe a couple months or something like that. And I really like what they added in the relationship between what is it, Tuppy and Mrs. Erlin, because in the book it's sort of like she's sort of ordering him about, and he's okay with it, but in the movie they added this depth. Like, she was fine with marrying him because she's like, okay, it's fine, he has money, he can marry me, I'll be respectable, it's fine. But in the movie there was so much more to it, because in the movie Mrs. Erlin doesn't want to get married because she feels trapped, and so they make it into a really sweet love story with that. So I love the movie, but of course there is no movie without the play. Play came first. Okay, A Woman of No Importance. One time many years ago I saw a movie called A Man of No Importance, and I think it might have been about Oscar Wilde. I don't remember what it was about, but so Woman of No Importance is this play in which a guy, how do I put this? A young man is about to take this apprenticeship with like a businessman, a successful businessman, and it's like going to be a really good position for him, and he's going to get to go abroad and be introduced in society, and he's like really excited about it. But the mother is like, she's not okay with it. And it turns out that the reason is that the guy that he was going to take this apprenticeship with is actually his father, who refused to marry his mother when she became pregnant. And so she is not okay with him going with the father because she feels that, he's a dastardly man and that her life was basically ruined because she couldn't be respectable after that. And so she spent all her life working with people who were more unfortunate than she was, because she didn't feel worthy to be like in any kind of good society. And it's really sad. And so then the son is convinces the his father to marry his mother and make her respectable, but she ends up saying no. So, and where the title comes from is that the father makes an offhand comment about the handwriting. Is like, oh, the handwriting looks familiar. Oh, whose was it? Oh, a woman of no importance. Like, he doesn't care to acknowledge the importance of this person who was the mother to his child because they never got married and he abandoned them or whatever. Or actually, she left, but he wouldn't marry them, so she considered it as he abandoned her, because it was way less acceptable to have children out of wedlock at that time. So, an ideal husband. What was this one about? A femme fatale goes around stealing people's brooches and trying to talk respectable businessmen into building up a scam for her own wealth and trying to blackmail him because she knows that he made his career on a crooked deal from the start, and she threatens to tell his wife, which would then apparently ruin his marriage because his wife thinks that he's perfect and never did anything wrong, and so he'd rather, like, go live abroad and just retire from public life, even though he's about to get this government position, because he doesn't want to lose the respect of his wife. But the secret comes out anyway, and they somehow manage to live with themselves. They all live happily ever after. Salome, I just made a movie of, so please check that out. The link is in the description box. It's Salome's Last Prance. It's also my most recent video upload. And that is the reason I did this whole reading of this whole book, is that I wanted to make a production of Salome in order to showcase my original music. So all the music that you hear when I'm reading on the channel, that is all music that I've written and produced on, the computer. So I wanted to show that music, to let you hear it, so that people can hear how it sounds in a movie. And what do you do when you have this music? You gotta show it off somehow, right? Thank you. So the Duchess of Padua. This was a peculiar play. This one I had to do the first part twice over because I realized that I made a mistake, and I was like I was using the wrong voice for an important character, and I'm holding it in the thing, and I'm looking at Oscar, and he's giving me the stink eye, and I'm like, oh, I bet I made a mistake. And it was such a big error that I had to do the part one of that over. And that's not something that I really was trying to do. I wasn't trying to go back and fix anything. I really just wanted to keep everything impromptu and moving forward. But it was such a gross error, I had to do it over. But yeah, this was a weird play because this guy Guido is he has his best friend, his friend who loves him so much. They have this great bro friendship, and then this guy, in a cloak comes around and tells him he's the son of a duke and he has to go avenge his father's death and stuff. And so Guido just abandons his friend, just goodbye, I'll never see you again. Okay, Guido, really? So he goes to the court to be a servant to this dude to eventually kill him when the time is right. And then he falls in love with the Duchess, and then they have their whole thing, and they're all in love with each other. But then something happens. I don't remember exactly what it is, but he dismisses her just as coldly as he dismissed his friend. I'm like, what is wrong with this Guido guy? He's just going around forming these relationships and then just coldly cutting them off because of this plot of avenging his father. And it just gets annoying. But something that's interesting about this play is that there is a major rewrite of the Romeo and Juliet scene where they're like, oh, is it the nightingale? Is it what bird is it to tell us what time it is? And he does that in here because he read Shakespeare, right? And then yeah, it was a really painful scene. It was very painful because, yeah, I don't even remember anymore. It was painful. Or maybe that was from Vera on the Nihilist. I don't know. But there were a couple of different plays where this theme of there's a barrier between us that cannot be crossed, and it's a recurring theme in Oscar's work, where there's something between the lovers that keeps them apart, or where somebody thinks that it's keeping them apart. And so that was interesting. Vera and the Nihilists. The voices in this one, I had fun with that, but there were also like, I feel like this was probably the most voices of any other play. And so I was really trying to like rack my brain to figure out what voices to do for this. And because I haven't been doing voices that long, so I have to come up with different things. I had like these really bad southern accents. I had like two French guys, one with a high pitch, one with a low pitch. I had who else do I have in here? But yeah, but this is a very political kind of play, and it does get pretty dramatic because it's all about like overthrowing tyranny, and that is another recurring theme in some of Oscar's work. In the Duchess of Padua, there's the tyrannous duke that has to be killed. In I think it was the young king. The young king finds out that all of his finery that is going to be made for his coronation is being made by the sweat of the brow of people who can't afford to live. And then in Vera and the Nihilists, it's set in Russia with whatever kind of tyranny is happening there at the time. And so yeah, this is one where Vera and the Tsarevich, the Tsar's son, are like in love, but it's a love that can never be because he kills his father, but then instead of returning to her and being a nihilist, he decides to stay on the throne, which is then against the creed of the nihilists. I mean, he promised to be a nihilist and to not let anybody be, enthroned. So then when he then stayed on the throne himself and did not renounce it, he was violating the nihilist like creed or code or whatever. And so she still had to kill him. And it was very sad. But I think she ends up dying instead of him. So yeah, it was very sad. A Florentine Tragedy. This one was pretty funny. I thought the voices I did on this one were pretty funny. But that was one of my earliest live streams. I think it was only the second one I did. And then La Sainte Courtisane. And this is the one that's sort of like Salome, where, a young lady in regalia is trying to seduce this spiritual man. And of course in Salome, it's John the Baptist, and she's the princess, and he completely rejects her. And she then takes revenge on him by having his head served up on a platter. But in La Sainte Courtisane, she's like trying to seduce this guy Honorius, and she goes through this whole seduction scene, and finally he's about to give in, but then she's like, oh no, don't do that, I want to be redeemed. And so they all live happily ever after. So let's see the poems. Ye shall be gods, chorus of cloud maidens. And sometimes there were like Greek words in here. Now I can deal with some French, but Greek, it's all Greek to me. I don't know a single letter, really, of Greek. It's always impressive when people do. I think it would be cool to study Latin, but Greek is beyond me, I'll tell you that. From spring days to winter, Requiescat, San Ignato by the Arno, Rome Unvisited. I'm trying to find if there's any poem in here that I really want to talk about. The little ship was really sweet. I felt that one was a lot different from a lot of the other ones, because this is about like a couple who like grew up together, and it's like, it's so sweet with like their childhood love story, and like, this is how we were when we were children, this is how we are now. I thought that was an outlier, let's say. A fragment from the Agamemnon of Aeschylus. That was pretty cool. I guess he must have translated that from Greek to English. And then, of course, Bosie liked to translate things from French to English. So he translated Salome, but apparently his translation was not very good. And so Oscar Wilde and Robert Ross had to do a lot of corrections to it, but apparently the reason those are not credited is that Oscar agreed and sort of made a promise to Bosie that he would be credited with the translation. So it still says, translated by Lord Alfred Douglas, even though we all know that that translation had to be seriously fixed. But such was Oscar's love for Bosie that he would give in to those things. I tell you what, Ravenna. Some of these poems were very long. Burden of Itis, Theocritus, Nocturne, Endymion, Charmides. Lots of Greek themes. He read Shakespeare. He read Ovid, as do I. We're taking a break from Ovid tonight to do this post-mortem stream, but tomorrow we will be back to Ovid's Metamorphoses when I come on here tomorrow. And after that, I'm planning on reading The Vanity of Arts and Sciences by Cornelius Agrippa. So please tune in for that. Whenever we're done with the Metamorphoses, we're going to go on to Agrippa, and then probably the 3 books of the occult from Agrippa as well. The Sphinx was a really interesting poem. It starts out like it's about a cat, but then it's some kind of evil spirit in a cat shape. But then the punchline is like, Christ. It's like, okay. And then his last poem, The Ballad of Reading Jail, based on his experience in prison. It's very sad. It's very grisly. And Oscar, after the ordeal, he suffered in prison because the conditions were very, very bad. Like, the food was very bad. He was very ill in prison. He actually worked to improve prison conditions after he got out. And apparently, like, he wrote articles that were printed in the newspaper, and apparently he was able to help some changes be made because the conditions were very bad. And, and then Piper Kerman also did the same thing. Of course, she was the author of Orange is the New Black, and, ever since she got out of prison, she's made her career on prison reforms as well. So it's always sad when an otherwise capable person gets imprisoned, and sometimes that's how prison reforms come about, because you have to have a capable person to work on the reforms, I guess. Let's see, poems and prose. Those were interesting. Essays. Okay, we're getting back into the essays now. And after this, we're going to be done. Let's see, The House Beautiful. Yeah, Oscar had a lot of interesting things to say about home decor. I'm trying to remember what they were. He was very specific. I feel like he was very against wallpaper or something. He says, don't carpet the whole floor. He says most modern windows are too large and glaring. In terms of furniture, avoid the early English or Gothic furniture. He's very into furniture. And, I mean, when you think about it, what did we have before furniture? Like rocks, So, furniture, it can be really taken for granted by people who have always had it. But when you don't have it, you really come to appreciate how much more comfortable it can make your life at times to have good furniture. The decorative arts, to make chaste and elegant patterns of carpet or wallpaper, even the little wreath of leaf or vine traced around the margin of cups we drink out of. Oh yeah, he talks about how like everything in your house should be beautiful. He talks about, well, there's this anecdote about Chinese dudes drinking cups, drinking out of tiny little china cups, and how some people will say, "Well, I want the cup to be thick so that it doesn't break," you know. And he'll say, "Oh, this is so terrible that these inns will give us drinks in these thick ass cups. They're so brutish, they're so gross, and it's ridiculous that we should be made to feel like we have to use these coarse, thick cups when I have seen Chinese dudes um, like drinking out of these tiny, thin little china cups and they never broke them. So if these poor Chinese dudes can drink out of thin little cups and not break them, so can I, damn it. Give me a nice cup." It's very funny. And that does appear in at least 2 of his essays, if not 3. So it was very important to him to have nice dainty cups to drink out of. He would not be impressed if you served him, you know, a coffee mug of wine. That would be unacceptable. Personal impressions of America. Please do not shoot the pianist. He is doing his best. That's pretty funny. He writes about Mrs. Langtry as Hester Graysbrook. He definitely admired certain actresses. He writes about a couple of them in here. Woman's dress. Of course, there was this whole thing, arg. I have a bunch pass me down furniture. Yeah. Sometimes with furniture, it just like pianos, it's the transportation can be a bigger problem than having it, you know. If you don't have a way to move it. Pianos you can get for free if you can move them. Moving them is sometimes more expensive than acquiring them. So yeah, there was this whole thing about women's dress and the what was it called? The practical dress, because at the time women were wearing all these corsets, and they would have like the tight corset, and they would have all these like skirts and stuff that were attached from the waist that was already stressed out from this corset. And so he talks a lot about how all garments should hang from the shoulders. And that was like a whole issue back then. And it's always funny how these trends come back around because, you know, a lot of us today don't wear any kind of restrictive garments. But then again, you have a few who do, and then waist cinchers are coming back, so it's like, it's always coming and going. Mr. Whistler's 10 o'clock, Dinners and Dishes, Hamlet at the Lyceum, Olivia at the Lyceum, Handbook to Marriage, Balzac in English, A Ride Through Morocco. Just all these articles that he wrote to be published in the newspaper. He was getting published a lot. That's wonderful. London Models. Oh yeah, De Profundis. So, what did I feel like I wanted to say something about De Profundis if I hadn't said it already. It's a serious letter. And it's sad that Bosie apparently burned his copy and never read it. And it's even sadder, or maybe it makes it less sad, that he later wanted to read it and was not allowed because the one copy that was in existence was put under lock and key until everyone in it died. So I guess it kind of serves him right for being a butthead and not reading it when it was set to him in the first place. But you know what? Are people buttheads, or do they just really have emotional problems that we shouldn't blame them for? Because you have 2 different attitude possibilities. You can say, well, someone's being a butthead, or you can say they're having an emotional problem, they're doing their best, and they're not out to hurt me, they're just hurt themselves. The Decay of Lying. This one is funny because there's this character who just scoffs at the idea of enjoying nature, and but then when Oscar was in prison and had been away from nature for so long, he wrote all this stuff about how, you know, when he gets out of prison, you know, he's just gonna live out under the stars and he's just gonna sleep out in the fields. So apparently he may have been repentant of whatever kind of attitude was here. Pen, Pencil, and Poison I talked about last night. Critic as Artist. The Critic as Artist is a really interesting essay, and it talks about how art criticism is a form of autobiography, and I really agree with this, and this is something that that I've experienced, like that I've seen in others as well. I had a friend, well, he's still my friend, but someone who would write all these articles, but it was clear that he was writing about himself through these people, through this music or whatever it is. And that's just, I mean, that's just one example. But because whenever you interpret a piece of artwork, you're showing something of yourself. You know, your reactions are from your own mind. Hello, and Idris, what it is. So whenever you have like a reaction to a piece of art, or you analyze it, you're putting those things through your own experience, and it's really a reflection on you, and that's so important for us to remember these days, because it sort of seems like these days there's a lot of like projecting intention on an artist instead of owning your own reaction to that art. And in the Metamorphoses, which we've been reading on these lives, the intro to that talks about this too, and it says, well, whatever you see in these books, you know, whatever stirs you, it's coming from you. Okay, good night. And we shouldn't, it doesn't really make sense to project what we interpret onto an artist. You know, what we only know, like our own mind. We don't really know what someone else is thinking and feeling. And so I feel like I'm kind of repeating myself here, but there's some important points, I think, in this essay, The Critic as Artist. The Truth of Masks. The Truth of Masks, like, was interesting, but also confusing, because he talks about how, like, if you're staging a play, like if you're staging a Shakespeare, you should really put it in the time period that it was meant to be in. And so, going by this essay, it seems that he would be, okay, I'm here too. It seems like he would be sort of against like the modernization, or like, you know, like a Hamlet that's set in present day, and he would say, well, it's supposed to take place in this other time. So I don't really understand where he's coming from about that. Maybe I'd have to like read this essay again, because it confuses me. And there was a lot of, I think there was a lot of French in it. I mean, I can read French. Anyway, The Soul of Man Under Socialism was a very good essay, and that was the first one out of this book that I did read on here. And he talks about that it's all about individualism. He says, now of course when we think about, you know, communism, socialism, we've seen it done in ways that were not what Oscar is talking about here. Like he says, you know, this would not involve any kind of compulsory labor. It's just that everyone would only do work that they enjoy and that gives them pleasure. And if anyone wants to say, well, no one will ever work, that's not true at all. That is absolutely not true at all. Because, you know, as soon as you are able to have the leisure to figure out what you want to do, you will do things. And I really think that like someone who like really has nothing, finds nothing, is like just not alive, you know? Because if you have time, you will find something that you love doing. And you know, and just on another note, it's the same thing with this universal basic income idea. You know, there will always be people who want to do more work for more money, but there will always be people who want to do that. There will always be work that people want to do when they're not being compelled to do other things for money with which to live. He says to try to solve the problem of poverty by keeping the poor alive or by amusing the poor is not a solution, it's an aggravation. Yeah. If you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. Yes. And I think it will be great when we can all do the things that we want to do, because I think that many of us would not choose to do things that are degrading to the environment if we didn't have to bring in money to pay the rent to people who have privatized the planet on which we live. Gosh darn it. So this is getting very political here. But it's important. So check out that essay, The Soul of Man Under Socialism. It's the first one that's on my Oscar Wilde playlist on my channel. And it's lovely. The Rise of Historical Criticism I talked about last night. From your lips to God's ears. Yes. Let the gods hear us. Let us all do the work that we love to do. Let us all do the things that feed our spirits. This is prime book poetry, folks. I mean puppetry, book puppetry. It's very important. So important. Okay. So, tomorrow we will pick back up with Ovid's Metamorphoses, and after that we'll be going on to Agrippa. But we'll be on Ovid for a couple more weeks, I think. So I'll see you tomorrow. Good night, Ronaldo. See y'all later.